Hi. If you want to challenge the status quo and retire early, there's special considerations you need to think about compared to a traditional retiree. Today, we'll talk about 4 different things to consider before you decide to turn in your resignation papers to your boss. Before we move further, please know that none of this information in this video should be considered as financial advice. I'm just a guy on YouTube sharing information with you about things we thought about before we made the decision to retire early. Throughout our working years, we've been coached on making sure that we're saving for retirement by contributing to either a 401k or an IRA, or since its availability in 1998, perhaps even a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k has been available with your employer. One of the challenges with only contributing to these plans is it locks up your money until you're 59 and a half, with some exceptions. As an early retiree, we have to keep in mind that with some exceptions, accessing an IRA or a 401k is restricted before 59 and a half and may result in a 10% penalty on top of what you're withdrawing. How can we avoid those penalties? One option available to you to be able to access your funds before 59 and a half is known as the Rule of 55. With this rule, if you retire from your employer in the year you turn 55 or later, you can access your funds without penalty. One of the challenges with this is if you want to roll over the funds, you will no longer be able to access those funds before you turn 59 and a half. The IRS Rule of 55 allows employees that leave their jobs in the year they turn 55 or later to access their 401k or 403b funds prior to the age of 59 without incurring the 10% penalty. If you decide to retire before you turn 55, this rule will not apply to you or be available for you to access the account funds before you turn 59 and a half. Another thing is that this rule actually must be included in the rules of your employer's plan. Sometimes an employer may not have this rule spelled out in the document, so this would not be an option for you to use. Make sure you talk with your employer and review your plan information to see if this rule is something that might be available to you to leverage. Something else to consider is that this Rule of 55 does not apply to funds that are located in an IRA account, only in an employer-sponsored 401k or 403b plan. Under Rule 72T of the IRS Tax Code, employees are allowed to take penalty-free distributions from 401k, 403b, or IRAs when they use what's called substantially equal periodic payments. To qualify for penalty-free withdrawals, the payments must continue for a period of either 5 years or until age 59 and a half. But it's important to remember that it's whichever happens later. So if you decide to do this and say retire at 57 and use this strategy, you're going to have to take these withdrawals until the age of 62. If you were to change the withdrawal amount for any reason, the IRS will actually go back and look at all withdrawals taken before the age of 59 and a half, and those withdrawals will be subject to a 10% penalty. There are 3 different calculation methods to come up with what your substantially equal periodic payment will be. We've left a link to an article below from Smart Asset that goes into detail on these different calculation methods and does a comparison between the Rule of 55 and the 72T rule of the IRS code. A traditional retirement at the age of 65 means that as soon as you retire, you're going to be eligible for Medicare. However, for those of us that decide to retire before that age, we need to figure out what we're going to do for our healthcare gap until we turn 65 years old. There's several options available, one of which is COBRA insurance. With COBRA, you can choose to stay on your employer-sponsored healthcare plan for up to 18 months. To find out what the actual cost of the insurance policy was for your employer, take a look at your prior year's W-2 form and look down in Section 12 of the W-2 form for something with a code DD next to it. This will show the full cost of medical insurance that you are getting for your employer. If you think you were paying a lot for insurance when you were employed, wait until you see what the cost of a COBRA policy is. Carrie and I were covered by her employer since we've been married. When we took a look at our 2024 W-2 form in Section 12 with the code DD and compared that to what we had been doing in payroll contributions, we discovered that a COBRA policy would be more than 15 times what we paid in 2024. That's just something that really wasn't financially feasible for us. With a COBRA policy taken out of consideration, what other options are available to you as an early retiree? Another option available is getting access through the healthcare marketplace or Affordable Care Act exchanges. Depending on where you live, this could be through a federal exchange or a state level exchange. Take a look on healthcare.gov and you'll be able to find out which path you have to take for the particular state that you live in. Depending on your income level, you may be eligible for subsidies through the Affordable Care Act. These subsidies are based on your modified adjusted gross income and are looked at each year and are reconciled each year to make sure that any subsidy received meets the eligibility rules within the program where you live. Eligibility is generally limited to anybody that lives with income between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level. This number will change annually for threshold levels, so make sure you take a look and look at what your income is and compare it to those levels to see if you're eligible for a subsidy. Since 2021, during the COVID pandemic, eligibility was increased for those over 400% of the federal poverty level, but with a cap on the cost of the policy being 8.5% of your annual income. As the law is currently written, these cap restrictions are set to revert back to the original rules at the end of 2025. I remember having a conversation with somebody in Chattanooga, and that he told me about the strategy that he and his wife used to where they built up some cash reserves, and then they set up their income stream so they were making more than enough money to not qualify for Medicaid, because once you qualify for Medicaid, you're no longer eligible for ACA subsidies, but to be able to have an income stream that would allow them to maximize the subsidy available to them. And the cash reserves allowed this because cash on hand is not looked at when calculating the subsidy. The subsidy calculations are based on your annual modified adjusted gross income. There's other options available. So for example, Carrie and I, we enrolled in a faith-based medical plan where we have share contributions that go into a pool that are shared amongst participants in the plan. And we've selected this with a very high deductible to lower our monthly share contributions. And we selected this plan because it would be a lower monthly cost, and because we're in what we consider to be very good health. We exercise, we eat well, we know our blood panels are good, and we don't take any medications right now. So we figured this would be something that would be best for us to do. Again, not financial advice. Look into things based off of your personal experiences, and if you need to, make sure you talk to a financial advisor about your particular situation. An early retirement often means that we're going to need to have a bigger nest egg to cover an extended period of time. And I say often because unfortunately, sometimes people are forced to retire early because of medical conditions. So if you're retiring early, how are you going to be able to bridge the income gap between when you can access your 401k, when you become Social Security eligible, and the date that you retire? Saving to a taxable brokerage account can be a great way to help bridge the gap between when you can access your 401k and when you become eligible for Social Security. I worked for a long period of time where my employer did not offer a 401k plan. To be able to make sure that we were still savings and not just letting the funds sit either in cash or a high yield savings, we started contributing to a brokerage account. So that way our money can grow as if it was in a 401k, but it was growing with a different tax structure. It was growing with after-tax dollars to where withdrawals will be, one, immediately accessible, and two, it would only leave us subject to capital gains taxes for things held more than a year. Because we have this account, we have been able to make the decision with confidence to be able to retire early, since we will have access to funds to cover cash flow needs until we become 59 and a half. Again, not financial advice. Talk to a financial advisor and do your own research to make sure what will work for you specifically. For those that have a high deductible healthcare plan, you should also be eligible for a health savings account. With this account, you save monies pre-tax, and those funds are available for covered expenses, and you can make those withdrawals tax-free. So this is known as a triple tax advantage. Something that I also discovered through doing some research, again, not financial advice, but you do have the availability to be able to invest these funds within your HSA. And we decided to start doing that to kind of help it boost the growth rather than it just growing on interest. It would grow on as any normal investment had the opportunity to do. Some early retirees generate passive income by either having real estate investments, doing Airbnbs and stuff like that, rental properties. They may open up a little consulting practice so that way they could work part-time, sharing the wisdom and knowledge and experience that they've gained through their working years. Another option available, and it's something that we're trying out here, who knows if it'll work, but we're actually started this YouTube channel, and maybe someday it will help provide some supplemental income through our retirement years moving forward. Stranger things have happened. Another option is a concept or strategy called geo-arbitrage, and this is something we're going to do to think about it as an American. Think about the number of people who worked their whole lives in the Northeast and then go ahead and retire in Florida to take advantage of not being subject to state income taxes. One thing as a caution is if you plan on using this strategy, don't just look at income taxes, but look at the overall tax burden. As an example, here you see a 2025 survey done by the Tax Policy Foundation. I think that's what it was. You'll see it in the screenshot. But it shows in 2025, here you see the top 10 states for a overall effective tax policy. And while many of them do have a number one ranking for income tax because they don't have state income tax, don't forget to keep in mind property taxes and sales taxes, because ultimately the tax man has to get a piece of your money to be able to cover for services that are being offered. In our case, how we're going to take advantage of geo-arbitrage is, since we sold our house in Tennessee before moving to Gaithersburg, we are actually renting right now. So what we're going to do is at the end of our lease, we're actually going to become nomads, or which sometimes referred to as being a flexpat instead of an expat. And while not moving overseas and staying in one place, our intention is to go ahead and be nomads and travel around to different countries, take advantage of lower cost of living in those countries. This is also going to be helpful for us on a medical perspective, because since we're covering ourselves just for catastrophic incidences, generally speaking, the cost of healthcare services around the world will be lower than it is within the United States. So we intend to really self-fund insurance unless something catastrophic happens. But for regular checkups, dental work, and stuff like that, our intention is to be able to take advantage of that out of country on a out-of-pocket cash basis. There is no question that if you decide to retire early, your future Social Security payments will be impacted. Social Security payments are based on your highest 35 years of earnings in your earning record. You can access your earning record by logging into the Social Security Administration's website and taking a look at your earnings statement as well as what's been reported as your annual Social Security earnings. Keep in mind, Social Security earnings, depending on what your salaries have been, may be less than what your total earnings were, because Social Security earnings are capped annually at a certain dollar figure. When looking at your Social Security statement, something else to keep in mind is the number that they're showing for your estimated benefit is based on an assumption that you will continue to earn the same Social Security earnings as the most recently reported year until you become eligible for Social Security. If you end up replacing that number with a zero, that's definitely going to have an impact on what your average or what your highest 35 years are, because you're likely going to be retiring in your peak earning years. Once you have your averaged indexed earnings, that is the number that number will not be what you're going to get for Social Security, but that number is used as the basis for calculating your primary insurance amount. And the primary insurance amount has 3 different buckets with pivot points that are referred to as bend points in the calculation, because if you look at a bar graph of what you'll get, it's the point where the bar graph pivots, so they just refer to them as bend points. I'm just going to look at some notes on this, but the first bend point, which for 2025 is $1,226, 90% of that number is what would be covered or what would be included in your Social Security benefit. The next bucket is 32% of any indexed earnings between $1,226 and $7,391. And just as a reference, annualized, the first bend point is $14,712, and the second bend point is $88,692 for indexed annual earnings. And then the final and the third bucket point would be 15% of anything over the indexed monthly amount of $7,391. A neat tool that I found and have played with is a tool at a website, ssa.tools, Tools. Please keep in mind this site is not associated with the federal government and is not associated with the Social Security Administration. It's a page that somebody has invested a lot of time in being able to see how any decisions will impact what your benefit will be. This will include the early retirement and the impact of the 35 years, as well as making decisions based off of the age of when you would file. On this site, you could enter your annual earnings by year that you pull from Social Security Administration site, and it will go ahead and use the current index in inflation factors used to index the annual wages to do an estimate. Again, this is not associated with Social Security Administration, so this is just an estimate based off the math. It will help you get an estimate of what your benefit amount would be based on the impact of not having potentially 35 years of earnings history or having zeros within those 35 years. Once that you know that you have your financial considerations in place, we think this video will be very helpful in you so you can make sure you're retiring to something, not just from something. I hope this video helped you think about some of the additional considerations that will be necessary if you decide to retire before a traditional age. Remember, none of this is considered financial advice, and you should take a look at your individual situation, do your own research, talk to a financial professional to make sure that you're making decisions based off of your particular situation. If you enjoyed this video, we would appreciate if you would like and subscribe. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. Until next time.